webinar up, and I was not seeing that anyone was in the waiting room, and so I had not hit broadcast. So I really apologize for that. I'm glad that one of y'all reached out to me. In the future, if you're having any issues, you know, I think we're all still trying to learn all the ropes. Feel free to reach out, email, call, text if you're having any issues. Okay, so now I am going to share my screen and get this presentation started. All right, thank you all for joining us this evening. Tonight we're going to do a little bit of a different presentation. You know, we're going to go over a couple of items that you've probably heard us go over before, but I really want to take an approach this time from the perspective of what Thea is working on, what we intend to do with our efforts in the community of Greater Fifth Ward, and kind of what we see as our lane in this effort based on what requests have been from community members. Okay, so first some basic housekeeping. I believe all lines are muted. At the end, we will have a Q&A where you will be able to unmute yourself. And if you have questions or thoughts between now and then, and you want to submit them, you can do so in the chat box. So please feel free to do that. And then whenever we do open up the Q&A, I just ask that everyone is respectful of one another, of our opinions, beliefs, and views, and as well as one another's time. I know that later on tonight is a presidential debate, and I hope that we are all going to be tuning into that. So I know it's quite a bit later, but I'll still be respectful of all of your time as well. All right, so at Texas Health and Environment Alliance, or THEA, our mission is to protect public health and the environment from the harmful effects of toxic waste. We have three primary approaches that we use in our efforts. The first is grassroots organizing. It is on the ground, boots on the ground, door to door, out in the community organizing, which has been difficult in this pandemic, but hopefully we'll be able to get out in the community soon. The second primary component is strategic science. We value the scientific process as well as scientific facts and evidence, and it's very important that we advocate from a solid foundation that is supported by science. And the third component is media exposure. We often, you know, have stories in the press. We've had hundreds of stories in the press in the last few years, and we use that as a tool to put pressure on the right entities publicly, and sometimes to target the right audience and get a message out there that really needs to be out there in the public. However, it's incredibly difficult to reach people in this day and age because not everybody watches the nightly news, not everybody reads the newspaper, not everybody's on social media, and certainly not everybody uses Zoom. So reaching folks is one of the most difficult things actually that we do. So I want to discuss with you, like I said, based on feedback that we have received from members of the public and the communities, kind of what our role should be in the efforts with the cancer cluster and the complex environmental issues in Greater Fifth Ward. And I'm really hoping to hear from some of y'all towards the end of this presentation so that you can give me feedback on what your thoughts are. So first I want to point out, I keep saying Greater Fifth Ward. We're going to look at a map in a minute. I am from, when I was a little girl and growing up until my teenage years, I lived in Atascocita. I went to Humble High School. So for me, when we say Northeast Houston, we mean like north of the Beltway. And I know, though, that within the loop, there's an area that's referred to as Northeast Houston. So part of what we want to do is we want to inform, and we want to make sure that when we're informing, we have the accurate information at hand, as well as the information that is supported by the community. So part of that is, what should we be calling these efforts? We want to help unite the voices and the various communities that make up these areas studied by Texas Department of State Health Services and identified as a cancer cluster. And we want to elevate the voices within the community. Outlined here in the bullets, our efforts are to mentor and guide community members through the health investigations, whether that's the continued efforts with Department of State Health Services, potential efforts with academia, and really just help navigate folks' questions when it comes to, what could be the health effects of these contaminants that are known to be in the community, or what does a cancer cluster mean? What do these technical reports mean? And try to help folks digest and understand this technical information. And then we want to inform the community members of the various processes going on in the community. We're going to dive into those various processes in this presentation because I think oftentimes folks hear cancer cluster and Union Pacific, when in fact, it's pretty complex what's going on within this community. Another huge thing that we do that I deeply value is informing the public on their rights to participate in the public process. A lot of people will contact us and say, hey, Jackie, my water is brown, and do you know what could be going on? And I'll say, well, where do you get your water? And so first starting to answer those types of questions can help empower people by understanding who they should be directing their concerns to and who they actually have the right to call, to email, to lobby, to ask questions to, and use their voices to express their opinions. Also, we want to bring people to the table. We want to work to bring people who need to be having conversations to the table to have those conversations, because at the end of the day, we sometimes have to have difficult conversations to ultimately see the progress that is needed. All right, so here's the map I promised. So as you can see on the right-hand side of the screen, just below 610, it says Northeast Houston. Like I said, growing up, in Atascocita, Humboldt area, I always thought of that as Northeast Houston. But I'm getting wind that some folks from within this area here would like to be referred to as Northeast Houston rather than Greater Fifth Ward. We want to make sure that we encompass all of the communities here that have been potentially impacted by the decades of contamination within this central region. So, here it says right here, Greater Fifth Ward, just north of I-10. There's Frenchtown, there's Cashmere Gardens. I'm not seeing Denver Harbor on here. And then when you jump just to the west of 59, you've got a couple of Superfund sites that we're going to touch on. So there are multiple communities that are encompassed within this area, within this complex environment, and within the cancer cluster and the state's investigation. So we want to make sure that we do our best to unify these voices, unify the efforts and the communities, and make sure that everybody is feeling heard. And that's really important to us. Okay, so here we're looking at a map of the cancer cluster. And so first and foremost, our involvement with this area and the communities has been helping to guide and navigate folks through this cancer cluster investigation, going through the reports from the health department, the multiple reports from the local health department to the state health department, digesting what they found, what they haven't been looking at, that they need to be looking at, what this could mean for public health, what could happen next, as well as, kind of what some of the options and goals look like, and helping to unify the goals. Sometimes we hear that it's better access to health services, maybe at LBJ, or maybe a cancer center in the community. Then we hear about buyouts. And so we've hosted a couple of live Zooms with the Center for Health, Environment, and Justice, where folks who have much, much more experience than I do have joined us on there. If you haven't seen them, you can find them on our YouTube channel. And so folks have joined us on there and lended their experience and expertise in some of these areas, really to help inform and educate residents on, again, what their rights are, and help guide folks towards central goals. To date, the Texas Department of State Health Services has published 3 assessments on the health within ultimately a 21 census tract area. Most folks are like, what are census tracts? So right now we're working on getting a page up on our website that we hope to be a central hub for information, where we don't just talk about this in census tracts. We talk about this in community terms, in zip code terms, and things that, most people can relate to versus census tracts. I have no idea what census tract I live in. So I completely understand that most of us don't talk in terms of census tracts. However, within this 21 tract area, the state did identify several cancer types that are within abnormally high rates. Now, the objective or the design of these studies was not to link what caused these types of cancer. It was not to link an exposure to an outcome. And so it's very important to understand these processes. And we've taken deep dives in previous Zoom meetings, so we won't go too deep into that. But what we know is that the state found high rates of acute myeloid leukemia, esophageal cancer, larynx cancer, liver cancer, lung and bronchus cancer. And so one of the things that we do to better understand the health of the community is we ask folks to stop by our website and fill out the health survey that we host on our website, because the way the cancer registry works is not as simple as we would think, and it also doesn't account for things like asthma, diabetes, or autoimmune disease, in addition to a myriad of other diseases that we feel are important to be looking at when we're looking at, is the environment potentially making someone sick? Okay, so like I said, oftentimes when people hear about the cancer cluster, when they hear about problems in this area, you hear about the Union Pacific facility. And, it is of great concern, very much so. The Union Pacific facility is under a state process for potential cleanup and a plan forward. Now, there are some really amazing entities doing great work with this site and the public process, like Lone Star Legal Aid. And they're a really great ally of ours to lean on when it comes to these technical issues, as well as to represent folks' voices within the community. So the Union Pacific site is creosote contamination and chemicals associated with creosote. It has 2 specific plumes of underground contamination that have migrated under over 100 properties, just what you see here. This is the main plume here, and these are the properties that it has migrated under to the largest extent. And there are collaborative efforts going on right now, and that's one of the things that we're hoping to help unify with the public, is the various efforts that are going on. The city of Houston, I know, has been looking at doing different monitoring associated with the vapors that could come up from this plume through the subsurface and potentially into the outdoor air. And then there's also citizen science efforts going on and data to action collaboratives. So we're really hoping to provide the general public and community members with a hub of information of all of these different efforts, so that if someone is saying, what's going on in my community, they can have a central one-stop shop to find what could be going on in their backyard. All right. I love this map. It's terrible but great at the same time. What we're looking at is an outline of Harris County, and the stars represent Superfund sites within Harris County. At the end of this presentation, I'm going to talk to y'all a little bit about why I got involved with the work that I do, why I founded Thea, and why we got involved with the efforts in Greater Fifth Ward or Northeast Houston. Y'all let me know. So I lived actually right over here in my early teen years and through my 20s, and I had no idea that the place my family called home right over here was in between 4 Superfund sites, and we were pulling up groundwater and we thought it was like fabulous pristine water, and in fact it was slowly poisoning us. And so looking at y'all's communities, which are right around here, again, you see a concentration of these Superfund sites. And so I want to direct your eyes to the box that's zoomed in on the top right of the screen. You're going to see 2 blue stars and 2 red stars. So the difference there is signifying state involvement versus solely federal involvement. These sites here are the North and South Cavalcade sites. So as I mentioned, the environmental issues in the community are complex. There's not just one polluter. And so we want to make sure that folks are aware of the different processes that are going on, that they have information about how they can engage in the various processes and be involved. All right, so first we're going to talk about the South Cavalcade Superfund site. As you can see, this site is bordered to the top by Cavalcade Street, and then it boxes down over here by Collingsworth. This is a huge site. It is 66 acres. I mean, that's just a really, really large contaminated area. From 1910 to 1962, this was a wood treating operation. So a lot of the contaminants here are associated again with creosote. However, from 1944 to 1962, within this red outlined area, which is now the Superfund site, under the federal process, it was actually also a coal tar distillation plant. So there were multiple different types of operations going on within this, what is now Superfund site. And so the types of contaminants that you have at this site is much more complex. You not only have those more traditional creosote type contaminants, you have volatile organic compounds, you have polyaromatic hydrocarbons, and basically these long words just mean toxic chemicals that can vaporize into the air, and they react in different ways when they're underground and when they're in the groundwater system. This site also has numerous types of heavy metals that it's contaminated with: arsenic, lead, and others. So again, like I mentioned, very complex issues here. This site was first listed as a Superfund site in 1986. 1986. And it's still being looked after by the federal government. The cleanup plan for groundwater was readdressed in 2014, and numerous 5-year reviews have been completed at this site. So what a 5-year review is, once the federal EPA, or Federal Environmental Protection Agency, believes they have achieved their remedial action goals, the site will then enter into the 5-year review process. And in 5 years, between completion and the 5 years, depending on the cleanup, there may be things like land use restrictions or certain monitoring that's going on. And then at the 5-year review marker, they will come back in and they will assess the situation. They will see, is what they have done and are doing enough? Is there still contamination? Is there maybe more contamination? And then eventually these Superfund sites are removed from the national priority list. However, this site has needed to be readdressed multiple times over the years, with the most recent readdress being within the last 6 years. Okay, and then the North Cavalcade site. It is similar in name, other than the first word, but it is different in terms of all of the activities that took place on this parcel of land. So it is just to the north of the Superfund site we just looked at. And so the South Cavalcade site that we just looked at really starts down here below this dotted line and below this red irregular triangle that we see here. So the heart of this site is about 1 mile south of 610. And it's smaller in size, still decent size. It is 21 acres, and it is from the Houston Creosote Company and their operations from 1946 to 1961. So unlike the South Cavalcade that had a couple of different operations going on, this site is a Superfund site because of the Houston Creosote Company and their operations from 46 to 61. This area was listed as a Superfund site in 1988. So 2 years after the southern site was listed. And then the cleanup plan has been readdressed multiple times since 1988. So what that means is they have pushed forward on a path for cleanup. And then, during that path, what they did either was not enough or it was not working. And so then they had to redirect and come up with a different plan of attack for the contamination. And so this first started in 1988, and then they've had to issue amendments to the record of decision or amendments to those plans for cleanups in 2009 and in 2011. Now, I looked back at the latest updates that you can find online from the federal government. And, they say that everything is working in accordance at these sites and that all is well. But I have intel that all may not be well and that these areas deserve a deeper look. This site has been on our radar as an organization for about 2 years now. And we don't have the capacity at the moment to really fully dive into these sites like it takes, but we are doing our best to sift through material and to try to gain an understanding of what's being done at these sites and if it is truly adequate to protect public health and the environment. I have a goal that within the next 12 months, we will have the capacity. So I'm working to continue fundraising and see that we have the staff capacity and the technical expertise to really take a deep dive into these sites and give them the due diligence that they deserve and that the public deserves, so that the public can have confidence that what's being done here is in fact protective of their health. Okay, so we've talked about the Union Pacific site, again, which is in a state process for potential cleanup. We've talked about the 2 Superfund sites in the nearby vicinity. What we haven't talked about is some other items that are hindering the ability of the communities to be whole. One is that there are hundreds of abandoned gas stations and hundreds of abandoned dry cleaners within the greater Fifth Ward area or the Northeast Cancer Cluster area. As many of y'all are probably aware, Lyons Avenue in and of itself was once a thriving lifeline of the community. And in and of itself on Lyons Avenue, there are over 40 abandoned gas stations and over 40 abandoned dry cleaners. And when you have an abandoned gas station or abandoned dry cleaner, there's great potential for localized contamination, which again potentially hinders the community's ability to be whole. So not only is there the economic blight, then there's also the notion of, well, how is this impacting public health? Is this impacting public health? We also have a lot of homes that are still standing today, that people live in today, that have lead paint and asbestos. And so, this area is known to be one of the highest areas around for lead blood levels in children. So that's definitely of great concern. As you can see here on these photos, this is the same corridor. You know, the top photo is a historical photo from Lyons and Jensen, and then what that area looks like roughly today. It's nothing like it once was. And so when you have all of these complex environmental issues, hundreds of abandoned properties, it's hindering to making the community whole. And so we want to partner with folks who are working in these various arenas to make the communities whole. And there's a major Brownsfield revitalization effort going on to do just that. And so some of the goals outlined for the Brownfield revitalization efforts, but whether it's from the city of Houston's efforts or the federal government's dollars, there's a collaborative effort going on to restore the urban and historical land, as well as the culturally important land in areas, to restore the natural resources, to protect the natural resources, and to enhance economic growth. If you're interested in seeing a little bit more of where I captured these photos from, Houston History Magazine on their website, which is houstonhistorymagazine.org, you can see it here on the bottom of the screen, has a great resource on the history of Fifth Ward. Okay, before we enter to Q&A, I just wanted to share a little bit more about, you know, why I, sorry about that. Why I care about, you know, what's going on in the communities, why I got involved, why I founded Thea. I set out to found Thea in 2014, and we received our 501c3 status from the federal government in 2015. My educational background is in environmental geology. I never saw myself going into the nonprofit sector, but like some of you, I know how it feels to be poisoned. I'm set up in bed right now, actually, because I have been having a lot of health issues recently, and I've been in debilitating pain, and sitting up is not really an option for me right now. And so this is the best I can do. We're rolling with it. And so I can relate to the feeling of wondering, is my environment making me sick? The feeling that you've been duped by corporate neighbors or by the government, that nobody warned you that the environment could be making you sick. And I, you know how it feels to be a young woman whose health was failing her, who, you know, saw no movement in her community. And because of that, I founded Thea, and I knew that there needed to be an entity out there in the Houston region that was focusing on cleaning up these toxic waste sites, at being a resource for communities like the community I came from, like people like I once was, like many folks in Fifth Ward are, Cashmere Gardens, not knowing, is this Superfund site or is this contaminated site by my house making me sick? Is my water safe? The state issued this health study. What the heck does it mean for my health? What does it mean for my family? And so I've worked very hard in the last 10 years to earn my seat at the tables like you see pictured here, to be receiving awards alongside the mayor of Houston. And oftentimes, like you see here, I'm the only woman in the room. And oftentimes I'm much, much younger than the folks that are in the room. And so that's what I want to help lend to the communities here, is that seat at the table. The doors that I've been able to open, I want to open them for community members and help elevate y'all's voices to see the change that everyone knows is so desperately needed. One last thing you see on the left-hand screen, myself here at one of our outreach tables with one of our team members, Christine Singleton. She is in class right now at TSU, so she's not joining us. But Christine is one of our longest running team members, and y'all should be getting much more acquainted with her moving forward, because we are assigning her more of a community role when it comes to the happenings within your communities and several of the communities that we've been working within, because at the end of the day, nothing is more important to all of these processes, whether it's the Brownfield process, the health department's process, Superfund process, the Union Pacific process, all of these different things. Nothing is more important than local knowledge. And so we want to be sure that we have someone in the community who is a trusted resource for everyone. All right, so now I am going to exit sharing my screen, and I'm going to open it up for Q&A. I also want to note, if any of you are involved with any of these topics I've mentioned tonight, or even ones that I haven't within the community, I would love to hear from you. I'm sure folks on the line would love to hear from you as well. So please feel free to you unmute yourself, and everyone right now is getting unmuted on my end. All right, everyone should have the option now to talk if you'd like. All right, so I'm going to go ahead. Sorry if I missed anything. Let me check in with my team with the chat. Hey, ladies, is there anything from the chat that I should be aware of?
Rodrigo says, Jackie, if someone has a question on testing, I can answer that.
Awesome. Thank you, Rodrigo. Actually, yeah, Rodrigo, if you have any updates from whether it's the RCRA process or the City of Houston's plans for monitoring or any of that, we'd love to hear from you.
Can you hear me, Jackie?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. So I'm going to assume that everybody else on the call can hear me as well. So I can just give two quick verbal updates. And thank you, Jackie, for allowing me the time to do that. So when it comes to, I'll handle two things: updates on the city's testing, and then that'll be number one. And then number two, updates regarding the site itself and the TCEQ process. So let's go with number one, updates from the city. For those of you who have been following this issue for some time, you'll recall that the city had really partnered with my client Impact and was going to start outrolling some very important testing there in the neighborhood called vapor intrusion testing, which would essentially measure an exposure pathway, whether or not it exists and in what concentrations of vapors filtering up from the contamination underneath people's homes and to the surface. That's testing that needs to be done. It's required as per the regulations, and it hasn't been done. And we've been signaling this to the agency for quite some time. COVID hit and things got delayed. The company didn't want to send out its employees, understandably. They didn't want to put them on planes and send them to a city where COVID was high and have them exposed to that. Numbers have started coming down. I have heard tentatively from the city that it sounds like the company, which is called Beacon, may be at a point where they are comfortable doing that work. I'm actually going to be getting on a call this Thursday in the afternoon to talk with Dr. Hopkins from the city specifically about that. So that is still to be determined. But it sounds like, and again, don't take this to the bank, keep your fingers crossed, but the testing could be happening at the end of October, perhaps into the beginning of November.
Great.
I'm working alongside my client to pass along a list of properties that are good candidates for that testing within our area of concern. And if the testing were to happen at that time, the monitors would stay in the ground for 2 weeks. They would then be recollected and analyzed. And I'm thinking if a conversation holds true from several months ago, that data would be analyzed in about a 6-week time frame. So we're thinking by the holidays, if everything goes off well, we could have the results of that data. But again, it sort of depends on whether or not the company feels comfortable sending its employees out here to Houston. So that's my first update. Second update is about the RCRA process. I was recently given a whole bunch of documents by Union Pacific about some their work in the past couple months. I have not gotten a chance to go through it all, but I will be handing that off to my expert for her to go through, so we can see about all the different monitoring events that have been going on over the past month. So the information from UP is, I still need to go through it. So that's still TBD, but things are moving forward, even in non-COVID times, because this is an administrative thing. It's always very slow. And then now you've got COVID slowing things down, but things are still moving. We're still going in the right direction. So we just ask for the community's continued patience and their continued support. And I think that's probably the extent of my updates, Jackie. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Rodrigo. Hey, do you have any updates from Impact? There was a question in the chat if there were any updates from Impact.
Not right now at this time. No really relevant updates from Impact, no.
Okay. The second part of that question was, what can folks do to help? So I'll say on my end, if you have anything, Rodrigo, or anyone to add, that'd be lovely. First and foremost, talk to your neighbors. Just raising awareness about these different issues is so important. Filling out our health survey is also important. I did talk recently with Texas Department of State Health Services and asked for an update on what's going on with the next steps for the cancer cluster. And so here's what I found out. So they were going to be setting up a call for a panel of experts. And there is a community member from each primary community within the study area that's going to be on this panel discussion. And so what that panel discussion is supposed to be about is if there are, if there is the feasibility to conduct a full epidemiological study. And so before that could be done, though, based on some concerns that were raised, some of which were concerns we raised, the group decided to have a conversation on the phone to see if, in fact, more information was needed before they could truly discuss the feasibility. And it was decided that more information is needed. So that's great. I really don't ever like to delay processes, but then at the same time, when we get these types of opportunities from our government agencies, they don't always come around more than once. So when you enter into these processes, you want to make sure that they are as conclusive and as valuable as possible. And so, the 3 health studies that have been published to date don't look at childhood cancer. Not a single one of them looks at the health of people under the age of 20. And that, in my opinion, is absolutely something that is needed when you're discussing the potential feasibility to study the community's health. So that to me is very concerning, and it is needed to be able to discuss the feasibility. So what the state let me know is that they had this call. It was decided they needed more information. So they are currently working on what the steps are to obtain the information that is needed prior to being able to discuss if a full health study is feasible. So I think that, I feel good about that. I feel like that means it's moving in the right direction, as well as they're hearing the community's concerns. They're hearing our voices and our concerns, and they're listening. So that's always a pretty good sign. What else you can do aside from talking with your neighbors and filling out our health survey? Helping us help you is helping to unite the communities, helping us understand who is out there, what groups are out there that we should be talking to, right? Maybe there is a really popular Facebook that folks in the community get their information from. Maybe there's, a really large church group that we should be reaching out to. We really need to be hearing from y'all who we should be reaching out to get the word out about all of these different processes, and then the resources that we are working to offer from to the communities. Okay, let's see. All right, is there anybody else that would like to unmute themselves and ask a question, express concerns, offer information? All right, we have someone on the phone line. You as well can unmute yourself and engage if you would like to do so. All right. If you're having trouble unmuting yourself, feel free to interrupt me. But if nobody else has any questions, I'm not seeing anything come through in the chat. So we are going to have one more of these Zooms this year. Unless there is particular information that we need to get out to y'all in a special session, then we will do so. But as of right now, we have one planned Zoom session to discuss updates and all things Greater Fifth Ward, which reminds me, if anyone would like, please drop your opinion, your feeling, your 2 cents in the chat about, or email me, follow up via email if you'd like, about what you would like this effort to be called. You know, do you take offense if you're from Kashmir Gardens or Denver Harbor and we say Greater Fifth Ward? Do you prefer, as a community member, to be referred to as Northeast Houston? Maybe I just grew up way far out in the suburbs, and you know, we were Northeast, but 20 miles northeast of y'all. So again, I would love to hear feedback from you guys on that. We want to be as encompassing as we can as we try to unify the efforts and the goals, as well as the voices from the communities. All right, with that, that will conclude our meeting tonight. Thank you all so much for your time, for your attention. And remember, please talk to your neighbors. One of the best things you can do to help your community is to just inform people, talk to people about what you know, and you know, what the health concerns are and the environmental concerns are in your community.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Okay, we know it's contaminated and we know all this is there. And why hadn't Union Pacific reached out to the neighborhood to offer some kind of help with the people during the COVID-19? And I'd like to know, why hadn't they reached out to the poor community? Because it's a very poor community, as you know, and try to do something for the community to help them over this situation that we're going through. It to me, it gives me the feeling that they're really not concerned. And I don't think it's fair.
I am with you. I think that, you know, this pandemic in particular has been a bright opportunity for some of these neighbors to help the community. You know, through the movement right now that's going on in our country regarding Black Lives Matter, Union Pacific actually released a statement, a corporate company statement about Black Lives Matter and equity and the value of community. But here you have, you know, a plume of contamination sitting under a community and numerous respiratory related types of cancer found in that community at abnormally high rates. So not only is the community dealing with the blight, you know, abandoned businesses, abandoned properties, low wages, and high rates of cancer and disease, But then most of those diseases that we know are there in high rates for sure are of the respiratory system, which COVID, hello, it's just like y'all are that much more vulnerable. So it I agree. It's been a golden opportunity for there to be outreach, for there to be services, for some of these entities to be good neighbors like they claim to be in their PR campaigns. Now, I know that Rodrigo is much more abreast than I am regarding what's been done. My understanding is that, Rodrigo touched on earlier the different types of sampling. My understanding from a letter I read from Harris County was that, there hadn't been any sampling beyond their property lines. Rodrigo, could you talk a little bit about like a couple points through history of what sampling has been done or maybe what hasn't been done from Union Pacific particularly?
Yes. So talking about the sampling with regard to Union Pacific, one of the pieces of sampling that has not been done, but that absolutely needs to be done, and that it seems like the city will be getting done here within the next few weeks, is the vapor intrusion testing that I was mentioning earlier. As for soil sampling, there has been very limited soil sampling. And I will tell you, I was approached by someone from Texas A&M today, actually, and I was given a presentation alongside COCO, which is Reverend Caldwell's organization, and alongside the Environmental Defense Fund. And I'm in from Texas A&M. They gave us a presentation of the type of testing they would like to do. But before we even take that to the community, we need to do our due diligence and make sure it's the type of testing that actually needs to be done, and it's not replicating other efforts like the one that the city is doing and the one that the county is going to be doing. And so we will be taking that to impact and letting them know what's happening. So thank you for your comment, Ms. Glenn. But there's so many moving parts with the amount of testing that has been, that people want to do. And we just always want to make sure that when someone comes in and is wanting to do testing, that's great. We just want to make sure it's the right type of testing and that it isn't replicating other efforts. But talking historically, UP on groundwater monitoring, they've done limited soil testing. They have not done any of the vapor intrusion testing that we're requesting. They did some very limited testing in January of this year along Liberty Road that they are trying to say qualifies them as having met a regulation for vapor intrusion, and it's our position that that is not the case. But when you're talking about why they didn't reach out to the community during COVID times, I mean, I don't know. I wish they would have. That's just an open question, I guess.
Rodrigo, I guess maybe just in general, I know that, Union Pacific had gone door to door at one point, or an entity related to them, about having residents living above the plume sign over their mineral rights. Aside from that, like, has there
the right to draw water? So that started back in 2014 when they approached the people who live above the plume and gave them a certain amount of money to sign away their right to draw water from their properties. Other than that, I am not aware of any outreach from Union Pacific.
Okay. Yeah, you see sometimes in like Port Arthur, for example, where an industrial community, and when you see some of these notorious polluters, I won't name any companies over there in particular, but you will see sometimes these entities reach out to the community and be like, what can we work together on? Like, what could we do to help facilitate making this community whole again? And sometimes that is setting up a health clinic. I know in Port Arthur, they did set up a health clinic, and it was a partnership between community groups and industry. Now then, where the cookie crumbled, where the disconnect was that then a lot of residents couldn't get to the health facility. So it was like, it was great, but then they needed to establish transportation. It was something, because then it was like in an area where a lot of folks couldn't access it. There's also been, even around the Houston area, partnerships with industry and communities where they've put in community gardens. And so you do see these types of efforts in other communities. And so, yeah, I mean, I guess like Rodrigo said, I too am not aware of anything that's gone on like that.
Okay.
And Miss Glenn, are you still living in the area?
No, I don't live in the area, but my brother is living in our house.
Oh man, yep. Okay.
And so I have a nephew that lives over there, and he suffers from asthma. And the medication is just ridiculous. It's very expensive. And this is what I'm talking about. He's not the only one in the neighborhood just to buy the medication. I mean, it's very expensive if you look up online when you're suffering from asthma. And you have to have asthma for the machine, asthma for the regular pocket,
Right.
for your pocket all day. All that is very expensive. And I mean, Union Pacific, we really need that clinic, like you say. People didn't have a way to get there, but
Right.
To me, they ought to be able to afford a shuttle bus that would set up a clinic and tell them what day the shuttle bus, what time it leaves every day, just to get pay someone to come and shuttle it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and some of these things are not unattainable, but what we need is community members and folks like yourself to come together and decide, what is wanted and set goals and let's tackle them. And, also, like yourself, I, in 2013, moved away from the community I came from. There was a cancer cluster. But when we left, my family and I left, but we said, we're not leaving the fight. We're not leaving behind all the sick people we've met, all the truth we know about what's going on in this community. And so thank you for, you've moved away, you still have family there, but thank you for still being involved. It's so important. And also, please, ask your family to fill out our health surveys, because that way, like things like asthma, that's not being looked at necessarily by the cancer registry. And so I've seen a lot of health surveys come in with asthma in the area. And so maybe based on the rates of asthma, maybe there's something targeted that we could come up with to give folks who are suffering from these respiratory diseases some relief. So that's why, just gathering that information about the people who live in the community or have lived in the community is really important as we look at different avenues to make it whole.
Well, I don't know about your community, but over there in Fifth Ward, around Lavender and on the back streets and all over there, most of those people are dead. So it's really not a lot to go back for. But just the few people that are still there, because it's very few that are living right now. And I get the feeling Union Pacific is just waiting on everybody to die. And so my thing about it is, I mean, we are going over there. We are supporting the people that are left in the neighborhood, but most of the older generation some in their 50s or 40s and died and even younger. It's just like the neighborhood is really bare. But when you're over there, it's somebody that sees you and everybody see you, and then they come out, Most of them are very sick.
Yeah. And what I learned from one of my greatest mentors, what I say about the community I came from, and what I'll say about your community, it is not like a bunch of genetically dysfunctional people all decided to move to the same community. Like, I don't believe in coincidences anymore. So what I'm saying is, it's not like I believe we can chalk all of this up to genetics or diet or lifestyle. I believe when we find these abnormally high rates of cancer with multiple types of cancer, that there's likely a common denominator, right? And what are our common denominators in our communities? The air we breathe, ground we live on, and the water we drink and bathe in. And I definitely know, I know how you feel about, feeling that, folks might be just waiting for the last people to pass. But what happens when the land is resold and reused? And we'll never know, really truthfully, what all has happened in the past, what all folks may have or may not have been exposed to in the past. But the testing that the city is planning to do, will bring us some answers about what's currently going on. And then that'll help definitely better assess and guide how everyone can move forward. And, are these areas safe for people to be living in or to be redeveloped?
Well, I can say this. They can't say it's because of the food we ate and, that caused a lot of these health conditions. Because back then, during those times, you really didn't eat out. Your meal was cooked at home every day. So a lot of that is not caused by even, it's probably caused by the water that you put in the food, but a lot of our meals was cooked healthy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And
I hear ya. And that's one of the reasons why, we really need the state to look at childhood cancer, because when it comes to discussing feasibility and what's really feasible and what really can be done in communities, it gets really easy to make excuses for adults and why adults have diseases. Not saying those excuses are always right, but or that I agree always, but it's just what it is. And it's not easy though to make excuses for children. The women from the community who all here talk about, that they've lost children, or folks who they're the only sibling still alive, these types of things that are not necessarily normal, rare or childhood cancer or high rates of childhood cancer. It's not easy to make an excuse for that. So we really need, childhood cancer to be looked at. And the registry has the ability, the state has the ability to go back to cancer rates starting in 1995. So, that's one way of getting a look at the health of the community back, more than 25 years.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I can understand that. Well, I know it had a lot to do with the water, because if my mom was taking chemo and the doctors never could establish why she would never go into remission, but we never looked at the water.
Yeah.
So she did everything with the water. I mean, everything you do in your house got to be done with water. So we know now that was one of the big problems.
Right. And so that type of knowledge is so important. And I've urged folks who are on this panel with the state health department to tell about these types of stories. One community member said they had a well, and Union Pacific came and told them that they couldn't use their well anymore. And so they shut down that well, but then they just dug a new one. And so, when entities say, well, there's not a route of exposure, or there wasn't a route of exposure for water, but then you hear these instances from the community about back then being on groundwater. It's not today, but back in the day, it was on groundwater. So this local information is very, very valuable in being able to understand, the past and how to move forward. So I really appreciate you taking the time to join us this evening and to share your experience with us.
Thank you.
All right, folks. Thank you all for joining us. I mentioned I would be mindful of everyone's time, and I hope that everyone has a nice evening, tunes into hear from our two presidential candidates, and exercises your right to vote in the future. Again, If you have not done so and you're from the community, please take the time to visit our website, fill out one of our health surveys. We will keep that information confidential. It just helps us navigate what types of cancer and disease should be looked at by our government agencies or academia. Thank you again, everybody, and I hope to see you next time.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.